Alright, welcome to the first of what will be a series of video lectures that you take online for Civics 9th grade with Mr. Colvin. These will be things that are available to you for the entire semester so that you can go back at any time and view them if you want to review. The first one that we're going to do is going to talk about comparative systems of government. What I really mean by that is we're going to be talking about different options that we have when we choose what form of government we want. Now, not all of those forms are going to be things that you get to choose. Many people are in forms of government that they do not want, and so we want to make sure that we have an idea of the different options available. The first question we have to ask, though, is why would we have a government? Why would we want a government at all? Because a government is a ruling body. It's an authority figure over the top of you, over an individual. And so most people, given the choice, don't want someone to have direct authority over them. The problem with that is if, as we discussed in class, no one has authority, then what we end up with is everyone fending for themselves and what Locke and Hobbes talked about and described as the natural state. So we've agreed to give up some of our rights and freedoms in order to have protection. And so while a government isn't the ideal solution, it is better than all the other alternatives. And if we think about this simply as a way to look at how we assess what we have, what we want, and how our government plays into it, we can take a look at the old you have two cows scenario philosophies. So in these scenarios that we'll discuss in class, we want you to understand the basics of this. The first thing is cows. Cows represent the basics of what we need. It's wealth, it's property. Once we get to economics, you'll understand what we mean by factors of production. But if you're a frontiersman and you're living in colonial America and or even a pre-industrialized America, and you're a settler, and you have two cows, in all honesty, you have everything you need to survive. You can bring them into the house, and they will generate heat. They produce milk, which you can then choose to turn into butter and cheese, so you can live off of the product of them. You can use their waste, their manure, to heat, to use as a mixture, as a mortar for building a house. So if you're by yourself and you have two cows, you have everything you need to survive. Now, I'm not saying that's ideally what you want, but you can survive. So the second thing is to understand that cows equal money in today's society. Everything that a cow produces in a frontier time is what today money produces. You don't bring animals in for heat, you pay money to the electric company, and they give you electricity which you use for heat. You don't bring cows in unless you live on a farm and milk them. To get milk, you go to the store and spend money. The second thing in our relationship at this end is understand the government and what a government does and how it affects stuff. The government really just controls how we use them, and in this case, them refers to the cows. How does a government control and dictate the rules of how we use our factors of production? So if you think of life as a game, what we have is a series of decisions that we have to make, and the society we live in, and by extension the government that we have, then creates the rules that we have to adhere to, and the rules of the game dictate how you win. So you can think of the government as a referee. They're the ones who are dictating how we play the game. Now, in general, we have two types of governments. We have a democratic government and authoritarian types of government. And they're going to answer certain questions in different ways. And the first question we have to ask is, well, how are we going to select our leaders? So we're all inherently equal in theory. So how do we then select the people that lead us? In a democratic form of government, we choose them in what we hope is a fair election. And we'll get into some of the flaws in our democratic system. We'll obviously talk about the flaws in other systems. In an authoritarian, they inherit their position, in other words, their leadership, or they take it by force. Authoritarian governments tend to be, in general, ruled by a bully. Think about playgrounds. The kid who's in charge is the biggest kid who's willing to do what it takes to exert his rule, his power over other people. Second question is, how far is the extent of their power? In other words, where are the limits on their power? Well, in a democratic government, the power is limited by a constitution and by other laws we pass. A constitution is just a document that is a social contract, an agreement between citizens and their government. In other words, we say in writing, this is the power and the extent of the government, and this is the power of its citizens. In an authoritarian government, depending on the type of authoritarian government, they have virtually unlimited power. The extent for democratic, hey, citizens, we have rights, we have freedoms, and it's protected. If something happens that is an infringement on your rights and freedoms, we can seek redress or a making of right, a correction by the government for those infringements. So if somebody does something wrong to you, you have someone that you can go complain to. If the government is what's doing something wrong, you can go and complain to the government and expect that they will make amends. They will correct it. For an authoritarian government, they can impose ideologies. That means they can tell you what religion, if any, you can have. They can talk about your economic life. They can dictate ideas relating to the family, how many children you can have. Third question, ensuring obedience. How do they make sure that citizens follow the rules? And in the democratic government, we rely on the rule of law, that, hey, we all respect the laws that we have. And by extension, then, we are responsible citizens who, once we know the laws, are expected to follow them. And that extends to the government. The government must follow the law. In fact, in many cases, the government is held to a higher standard than citizens. In an authoritarian government, they control the media. There's only one newspaper, one TV station, and the government controls it. They use force. They arrest people. They execute people. They have tons of propaganda. Propaganda is convincing you to think a certain way by misleading messages. And they'll use terror. We'll go over different examples of them. The last one is political parties. In a Democratic Party, we allow multiple parties. We have a Nazi Party of America. We'll talk about that in Unit 2. We allow people to have ideologies, especially those that we find offensive. In an authoritarian government, if there's a political party, it is a single political party. Now, the evolution of authoritarian, this is the last slide for this part 1, is going to be from the earliest forms to the most complex forms of authoritarian governments. We have much more variety in forms of authoritarian government than we do in democratic governments. The first is anarchy. This is the natural state. And we could argue, well, how is this an authoritarian government? It is in very, very small pockets. There are lots and lots of authoritarian governments. It is whoever is the strongest within that system. The natural state, again, we talked about, this is life without government. This is anarchy. It's short, brutish, painful, poor. Second is a dictatorship. This is where enough people are afraid, and then they'll allow one person to take over. A monarchy is an extension of a dictatorship often, and what it is we expand on and try and stabilize a dictatorship. And then we have totalitarianism, and this is the modern complex form of authoritarian government. It has two separate factions, communism and fascism. And what we will do in the second portion of this, that you'll study probably tomorrow, is going to break down each of these and then talk about democracy.